Monday mornings were usually dull at the office, but this one hit differently. My head was still pounding from the weekend binge, and the coffee in my hand tasted more like regret than caffeine. Walking through the endless rows of gray cubicles, I felt like a zombie shuffling into another week of meaningless reports and fake smiles. That was, until Paul popped his head over the divider like some gopher on speed. "Ethan, buddy! You're just the man I need!" he exclaimed, his eager smile as obnoxious as ever. Paul was the kind of guy who could sell sand to a beachgoer but had the emotional intelligence of a stapler. Tall, blonde, and perpetually disheveled, he was like an overgrown frat boy who never got the memo to grow up. "What now, Paul?" I sighed, setting down my mug and bracing for whatever nonsense he was about to throw my way. "I need you to do me a solid," he said, leaning in conspiratorially. "Michelle finally said yes to going out with me, but there's a catch. She's dragging her friend along, and I need you to, keep her company." Michelle. Just the name was enough to get my attention. She was the company's version of a celebrity, stunning, confident, and way out of Paul's league. If her friend was even half as attractive as her, this could actually be interesting. "Sure, why not?" I said, already imagining a pleasant evening with a Michelle-adjacent beauty. Paul's grin widened like he had just won the lottery. "Great! You're a lifesaver. Oh, by the way, her friend is, Stephanie. You know her from the tax department?" The name hit me like a bucket of cold water. Stephanie? The shy, awkward girl who limped around the office like a wounded deer? I had barely noticed her until now, and what little I did know was less than inspiring. She was a social ghost, always hiding behind her curtain of dull brown hair and drab clothing. "Wait. Stephanie? The one who always eats lunch alone?" I asked, trying to mask my dismay. Paul's grin faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered. "Yeah, but hey, she is super nice. And you can leave early if it's not working out. Just don't leave me hanging, man." Reluctantly, I agreed. What could go wrong, right? Turns out, a lot. The day dragged on, each tick of the clock mocking me as I sat at my desk, pretending to focus on spreadsheets. By the time 6 p.m. rolled around, I was equal parts curious and apprehensive. The venue was a trendy bar downtown, the kind of place where overpriced cocktails and dim lighting masked 100 awkward first dates. Paul was already there when I arrived, nervously adjusting his tie like he was about to propose. "Dude, relax. It's just a date," I said, clapping him on the back. "Easy for you to say. Michelle is like Beyoncé, and I am a backup dancer at best," he muttered. Before I could respond, a taxi pulled up, and out stepped Michelle. She looked like she had walked straight out of a fashion magazine, her green dress hugging her figure perfectly. Paul straightened up, suddenly exuding the confidence of a used car salesman. Then Stephanie stepped out. The second Stephanie stepped out of the taxi, I almost didn't recognize her. Gone was the limp-haired wallflower from the tax department. This Stephanie was, well, not quite stunning, but definitely surprising. Her hair was pulled into an elegant bun, revealing features I had never paid attention to before. She wore a navy blue dress that hugged her figure in a way that said, "I know I am not Beyoncé, but I clean up well." And then there was the scar, a thin, silvery line tracing from her temple to her cheekbone. It was subtle, but it added a kind of rough edge to her otherwise timid demeanor. "Hey," she said softly, her voice almost drowned out by the city noise. Her eyes met mine, and for a moment, I forgot how this night was supposed to go. Paul nudged me. "Say something, dude," he hissed under his breath. "Oh, hi, Stephanie," I stammered. "You look great." Her cheeks flushed pink, and she smiled shyly. "Thanks. You too." The four of us headed inside, and while Paul and Michelle were already deep in some flirty banter, Stephanie and I trailed behind in an awkward silence. I was racking my brain for something to say when the hostess greeted Stephanie like an old friend. "Stephanie! You look amazing! Long time no see." "Hi, Ruby," Stephanie said, her face lighting up. "It has been a while. How are the kids? Wait, what? How did she know the hostess? And the bartender? And half the staff, apparently. Everywhere we went, people were greeting her warmly, and she responded with the kind of easy familiarity that suggested this was her turf. By the time we sat down, I was already reconsidering my assumptions about Stephanie. She might have been invisible at work, but here? She was practically royalty. We ordered drinks, and conversation started to flow. Stephanie's voice was soft but steady, and as we talked, I found myself leaning in to catch every word. She told me about her love for sports, especially soccer, and how she had grown up in a family of die-hard fans. Then, out of nowhere, she dropped the bombshell. I have been skydiving 3 times. Wait, what? I almost choked on my drink. Skydiving? You? She laughed, a genuine, melodic laugh that made her seem like a completely different person from the one I had judged earlier. Yeah, why not? It is the most liberating thing in the world. You should try it sometime. Before I could respond, Michelle leaned over from across the table. Paul and I are going to grab some air. You two okay here? I nodded, barely noticing as they disappeared. My focus was entirely on Stephanie now. So, the limp? I blurted out before I could stop myself. I mean, if it is not rude to ask. Stephanie's expression faltered for a moment, but then she smiled. It is okay. When I was 10, I got hit by a car while riding my bike. They had to amputate below the knee. I felt a pang of guilt for asking, but she shrugged it off. It was tough at first, but my parents made sure I never let it stop me. I have run 5 marathons with my prosthetic leg, and I am training for my 6th. Damn, I muttered, genuinely impressed. You are incredible. Stephanie's eyes softened. Thank you. Most people either pity me or avoid the subject altogether. I appreciate your honesty. We fell into an easy rhythm after that, trading stories and jokes until I completely forgot we were supposed to be the awkward backup couple. Paul and Michelle returned, their faces flushed with excitement. Or maybe just alcohol. Michelle giggled. You guys look like you are having fun. We are, Stephanie said, surprising both of us. Actually, I am glad I came tonight. Me too, I added, feeling my own cheeks heat up. It was the truth. Against all odds, this night was turning into something I had not expected, enjoyable. We left the restaurant together, stepping into the cool night air. The city was alive around us, traffic humming, people laughing on sidewalks, neon lights casting their vibrant glow. I offered to walk Stephanie home, and to my surprise she agreed. The walk was quiet at first, but it was not uncomfortable. There was a kind of unspoken understanding between us now, a fragile connection that had started forming over dinner. So, I said, breaking the silence, you never struck me as the adventurous type. Stephanie chuckled. That is because you never really looked Ethan. I winced a little at the truth in her words. Fair point. I guess I have been kind of blind. Well, better late than never, she said, her tone teasing but kind. Then she paused, her gaze turning serious. Honestly, though, I am glad you came tonight. I almost backed out. Why? I asked, genuinely curious. She hesitated, biting her lip. Because I have had too many nights where people treat me like, I don't know, like I am broken or something. I did not want this to be another one of those nights. Her words hit me harder than I expected. You are not broken, Stephanie. Not even close. The corners of her mouth lifted into a small, grateful smile. Thanks. By the time we reached her apartment building, I felt like I had known her for years instead of just a few hours. She turned to me at the door, and for a moment, I thought she might invite me up. But instead, she surprised me with a hug. Good night, Ethan, she said softly. Good night, Stephanie, I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. The next morning at the office, I felt different, lighter somehow. When I walked in, people were already whispering, glancing at me like I had grown a second head. I spotted Paul near the coffee machine, grinning like he had just won the lottery. Morning, Ethan, he said, his tone dripping with amusement. Morning, I replied cautiously, pouring myself a cup of coffee. So, how was it? You and Stephanie seemed to hit it off. I shrugged, trying to play it cool. It was nice. She is not what I expected. Paul smirked. Yeah, you seem pretty into her. Not that I am judging. She looked great last night. I frowned, trying to decipher his tone. Was he being genuine or just messing with me? Before I could respond, Michelle appeared, her perfect smile lighting up the room. Ethan! Stephanie told me you walked her home last night. That is so sweet, she said, her voice carrying just enough volume to turn a few heads in the office. Yeah? I muttered, suddenly feeling self-conscious. It was no big deal. Michelle leaned closer, lowering her voice. Just so you know, she had a really good time. You should ask her out again. Before I could answer, she was gone, leaving me standing there like a deer in headlights. The rest of the day passed in a blur, but one thing was clear, I could not stop thinking about Stephanie. By Friday, I finally worked up the courage to ask her out for a proper date. She was standing by the water cooler, chatting with one of the IT guys, when I approached. My palms were sweaty, my heart racing like a teenager's before prom. Hey, Stephanie, I said, interrupting their conversation. Do you have a minute? She turned to me, her expression unreadable. Sure. What is up? I was wondering if you would like to grab dinner with me tomorrow night. Just the two of us. The IT guy awkwardly excused himself, leaving us alone. Stephanie stared at me for a moment, her face betraying a mix of surprise and uncertainty. Dinner? She repeated, as if testing the word. Yeah. I mean, only if you want to. I added quickly, feeling the heat rise to my face. To my relief, her lips curled into a shy smile. I would like that. Saturday night rolled around, and I found myself more nervous than I had been in years. I picked a cozy Italian restaurant downtown, the kind of place with candlelit tables and soft jazz playing in the background. When Stephanie walked in, I almost forgot how to breathe. She wore a simple black dress that highlighted her natural elegance, and her hair was down for once, framing her face beautifully. Hi, she said, her voice warm but tentative. Hi, I replied, standing up to pull out her chair. You look amazing. Thank you, she said, her cheeks flushing slightly as she sat down. The evening was perfect, or at least, it started that way. We talked, laughed, and shared stories over pasta and wine. For a while, it felt like nothing else in the world existed except the two of us. And then, everything took a turn. As we were finishing our tiramisu, I noticed Stephanie's expression shift. Her smile faltered, her eyes darting toward the entrance of the restaurant. I turned to see what, or who, had caught her attention. Walking in was a tall man, broad-shouldered with a cocky smirk that could curdle milk. He was flanked by two equally obnoxious-looking friends, the kind of guys who exuded frat boy energy, long past their prime. The trio made a beeline for the bar, laughing loudly enough to draw attention. Stephanie visibly tensed, her hands gripping the edge of the table. What is wrong? I asked, leaning closer. She shook her head, forcing a smile. Nothing. Just someone I did not expect to see. Before I could press her further, one of the guys spotted her. His smirk widened as he sauntered over, drink in hand. Well, if it is not Stephanie from Tax, he drawled, his tone dripping with mockery. Long time no see. Hi, Greg, she said, her voice tight but polite. I am kind of in the middle of something. Greg ignored her, his eyes flicking to me. And who is this? Your latest project? He asked, the sneer in his voice unmistakable. I am Ethan, I said evenly, trying to keep my temper in check. Her date. Greg let out a low laugh, shaking his head. Date, huh? That is rich. Does he know the truth, Steph? Stephanie's face went pale. Greg, stop. But Greg was just getting started. You know, she is great at keeping secrets, he said, leaning in closer to me. But do not get too attached, buddy. She has a habit of running when things get real. Greg, I am warning you, Stephanie said, her voice trembling now. Or what? He taunted, his grin widening. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. I think you should leave. Greg glanced at me, his smirk faltering for a split second before he regained his bravado. Relax, man. I am just catching up with an old friend. No, I said, my voice low but firm. For a moment, I thought he might push back, but then he shrugged, muttering something under his breath before slinking back to the bar. Stephanie let out a shaky breath, her hands trembling as she reached for her glass of water. I am sorry about that, she said quietly. He is someone I used to know. Stephanie, who was that guy? I asked, my curiosity mixed with concern. She hesitated, her gaze dropping to the table. Just an ex. A mistake I made a long time ago. I wanted to press her for more details, but the look on her face stopped me. Whatever history she had with Greg, it was clearly painful. You do not have to explain, I said softly. But if he bothers you again, let me know. She nodded, her smile returning, albeit faintly. Thank you, Ethan. The rest of the evening went by without incident, but Greg's words lingered in the back of my mind. As I walked Stephanie to her apartment, I could not shake the feeling that there was more to her story than she was letting on. Still, I decided not to push. If she wanted to share, she would do it in her own time. When we reached her building, she turned to me, her expression softer than I had ever seen it. Thank you for tonight. It meant a lot. Anytime, I replied. And Stephanie? Do not let guys like Greg get to you. He does not know who you are now. Her smile widened, and for the first time, it reached her eyes. Good night, Ethan. Good night. Back at home, I could not sleep. My mind was a whirlwind of questions, doubts, and the lingering image of Greg's smug face. I had never been the jealous type, but something about him rubbed me the wrong way. More than that, I was starting to realize just how much Stephanie had been through, and how much I wanted to protect her from whatever ghosts were still haunting her. That Friday evening, I found myself standing outside Stephanie's apartment, my palms sweaty despite the cool breeze. I had asked her out for dinner at a cozy Italian place downtown, a proper date this time. When she opened the door, she looked stunning. Not in a movie star kind of way, but in a way that made me forget how to breathe for a moment. Her hair was loose, falling in soft waves around her shoulders, and her simple black dress hugged her figure perfectly. Hi, she said, her voice warm but nervous. Hi, I managed to reply. You look amazing. Thanks. You clean up pretty well yourself, she teased, her smile instantly putting me at ease. The restaurant was dimly lit, with soft jazz playing in the background and the faint aroma of garlic bread in the air. We shared a bottle of wine, and for the first hour, everything was perfect. We laughed, talked about work, and swapped stories from our childhoods. For once, I felt like I was truly getting to know her, peeling back the layers of the shy girl I thought I knew. But then, midway through dessert, the evening took an unexpected turn. Stephanie had been telling me about her favorite travel memories when her expression suddenly froze. Her eyes darted toward the entrance of the restaurant, and her face went pale. What is wrong? I asked, turning to see what had caught her attention. Standing near the bar was a man, tall, broad-shouldered, and exuding arrogance. His cocky smirk was aimed straight at Stephanie. Who is that? I asked, keeping my voice low. She hesitated, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped her fork. Just someone I used to know. The man sauntered over to our table, his smirk widening with every step. Well, if it is not Stephanie, he drawled, his voice dripping with mockery. Long time no see. The man standing before us radiated smugness, his presence thickening the air around our table. Stephanie's posture stiffened, and I could tell she was trying to maintain composure, but her fingers were nervously twisting the edge of her napkin. And who is this? The man asked, his eyes landing on me like I was some obstacle in his way. I am Ethan, I said firmly, extending my hand even though I already disliked the guy. Stephanie's date. He ignored my hand, his grin widening. Date, huh? That is interesting. Stephanie's voice cut through the tension, colder than I had ever heard it. What do you want, Greg? Greg. The name dripped with history, and not the good kind. Relax, Steph, he said, holding up his hands in mock surrender. I just came over to say hi. You are looking different. Her jaw tightened, but she did not respond. Anyway, Greg continued, his attention shifting back to me. You might want to ask Stephanie about her little habit of disappearing when things get tough. That is enough, Greg, Stephanie snapped, her voice rising slightly. Heads at nearby tables turned in our direction. He chuckled, clearly enjoying the scene he was creating. Touchy, as always. Good luck, man. You are going to need it. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. I think it is time for you to leave. Greg raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. Or what? I took a step forward, lowering my voice. Or I make you. For a moment, the air crackled with tension. Then, to my surprise, Greg stepped back, holding his hands up again. All right. No need to get all worked up. Enjoy your evening. He walked away, and the moment he was out of earshot, Stephanie let out a shaky breath. I am so sorry, she said, her voice barely audible. You do not have to apologize, I said, sitting back down. But who is that guy? She hesitated, staring down at her plate. An ex-someone I should have left in my past a long time ago. We finished dinner in relative silence, the mood significantly darker than before. As we walked back to her apartment, I could not shake the image of Greg's smug face or the way Stephanie had reacted to him. She seemed fragile, like a bird that had been caged for too long. At her door, I turned to her. Are you okay? She nodded, but her eyes betrayed her. Yeah. Thanks for tonight, Ethan. I really appreciate it. I am here if you ever want to talk, I said, meaning every word. She gave me a small smile, then surprised me with a hug. Good night, Ethan. Good night, Stephanie. As I walked away, my mind churned with questions. Who was Greg, really? And what had he done to leave such a mark on her? That night, sleep did not come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Greg's smug face and the way Stephanie had tensed up when he appeared. There was history there, messy, painful history, and it was clear she was still carrying the weight of it. The next morning, I was determined to get some answers. I texted Paul, figuring he might know something. If there was gossip about Greg, Paul would have heard it. Me, hey, you ever heard of a guy named Greg? Used to date Stephanie? Paul, oh yeah, that Greg. Why? Did he show up or something? Me, yeah, last night. Guy's a total prick. What's his deal? Paul, dude, he's bad news. They dated for a while, but he treated her like crap. Cheated on her, gaslit her, you name it. She finally broke it off, but he kept showing up at her apartment until she threatened to call the cops. Me, Jesus. Why didn't anyone say anything? Paul, it's Stephanie, man. She doesn't talk about her personal life. Most people didn't even know they were dating until it was over. The anger bubbling inside me reached a boiling point. The thought of anyone treating Stephanie that way made my blood boil. She deserved better, so much better. At work on Monday, I decided to check in on her. I found her in the break room, staring blankly at the coffee machine as it sputtered out a fresh brew. Hey, I said softly, not wanting to startle her. She looked up, her smile faint but genuine. Hey, Ethan. Can we talk? I asked. Somewhere private? Her expression turned cautious, but she nodded. We found an empty conference room, and as soon as the door closed, I turned to her. I know about Greg. Her eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. What do you mean? Paul told me a little about what happened. Stephanie, I am so sorry you had to go through that. She sank into a chair, her hands gripping the edge of the table. I did not want you to know. I did not want anyone to know. You do not have to go through it alone, I said, sitting across from her. If he ever bothers you again, you tell me. I will make sure he does not get near you. She looked at me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Thank you, Ethan. That means a lot. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then she took a deep breath, composing herself. I should get back to work. Of course, I said, standing up. But seriously, Stephanie. If you ever need anything at all, I am here. The next few weeks passed without incident, and Stephanie seemed lighter, more at ease. We started having lunch together regularly, and I noticed how her confidence grew with each passing day. The shy, reserved woman I had first met was blossoming into someone vibrant and full of life. But just when I thought things were finally settling down, Greg reappeared. It was a Friday evening, and Stephanie and I were grabbing drinks after work. The bar was crowded, the air buzzing with laughter and music. We were seated in a corner booth, talking about her upcoming marathon, when I saw her face fall. He's here, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I followed her gaze and saw Greg leaning against the bar, his eyes locked on her. My stomach tightened. He had not noticed me yet, but I could see the wheels turning in his head as he watched Stephanie. Do you want to leave? I asked. She shook her head, her jaw set. No. I am done running. Greg's smirk was as infuriating as ever as he sauntered toward our booth, drink in hand. Stephanie sat rigidly, her nails digging into the edge of the table. I could feel her tension radiating off her, but I admired her resolve to face him. Stephanie, Greg said, his tone laced with fake charm. Twice in 1 month. It must be fate. Greg, she replied flatly, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. What do you want? He ignored her question, his eyes flicking to me. Oh, you again, he said, giving me a condescending once-over. Still playing the knight in shining armor? I do not play, I said calmly, my gaze locked on his. I mean what I say. Greg chuckled, shaking his head. Relax, man. I am just here to talk to an old friend. We are not friends, Greg, Stephanie interjected, her voice gaining strength. And we have nothing to talk about. Greg's expression hardened for a moment, but he quickly masked it with another smirk. Still holding a grudge, huh? You used to be so forgiving. Stephanie's fists clenched, and I could see the hurt flash across her face. You should go, I said, standing up. Now. Greg looked at me, sizing me up. Or what? Or we find out what happens when you push too far, I said, my voice low but firm. For a moment, it seemed like Greg might call my bluff. But then he took a step back, raising his hands in mock surrender. All right. I am leaving. No need to get all macho. He turned and walked away, but not before shooting one last look at Stephanie. You will regret this, Steph, he muttered under his breath, just loud enough for us to hear. Stephanie exhaled shakily, her hands trembling as she reached for her drink. I am so sorry, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Do not apologize, I said, sitting back down. You did nothing wrong. Her eyes filled with tears, but she quickly wiped them away. I thought I was done with him. I thought I could move on. You are moving on, I said gently. But he does not get to decide when it is over. You do. She nodded, her expression softening. Thank you, Ethan. For everything. Always, I said, meaning every word. The rest of the night passed quietly. Stephanie opened up more about her past with Greg, the manipulation, the gaslighting, the constant erosion of her confidence. Listening to her, I felt a surge of protectiveness. No one deserved to go through what she had endured, least of all someone as kind and resilient as Stephanie. When I walked her home that night, she paused at her door, turning to face me. I do not know what I did to deserve someone like you, she said, her voice trembling. You deserve more than I could ever give, I replied. But I am going to try anyway. She smiled, her tears glistening in the porch light. Good night, Ethan. Good night, Stephanie. The next week at work, I noticed a change in Stephanie. She walked with more confidence, her head held high. The whispers and stares from colleagues seemed to roll off her, and for the first time, I saw her truly embrace who she was. But Greg was not done. It happened on a Wednesday evening. I was leaving the office when my phone buzzed with a text from Stephanie. "Stephanie, can you come over? Greg is here." My heart dropped. I texted back immediately. "Me on my way. Do not open the door." I drove to her apartment, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. When I arrived, Greg was standing outside her building, shouting her name. His voice was slurred, and the bottle in his hand explained why. "Hey!" I called, stepping out of my car. "What the hell are you doing here?" Greg turned, his eyes bloodshot. "This is none of your business." "It became my business the moment you started harassing her," I said, moving closer. "Leave. Now." "Or what?" he sneered, swaying slightly. "Or I call the cops," I said, pulling out my phone. Greg's bravado faltered, but he tried to cover it with a laugh. "You are not worth it," he muttered, stumbling away. I waited until he was out of sight before heading up to Stephanie's apartment. She opened the door, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear. "Are you okay?" I asked, stepping inside. She nodded, but her voice shook. "I was so scared he would not leave." "He will not bother you again," I said firmly. "Not if I have anything to do with it." The following morning, I woke up to a flurry of notifications on my phone. Stephanie had sent me a text just before dawn. "Stephanie, thank you for last night. I do not know what I would have done without you." I replied immediately. "Me, you never have to face him alone. Ever." Her response came moments later. "Stephanie, I mean it, Ethan. You have been my rock through all of this." The warmth her words brought me was tempered by the lingering anger I felt toward Greg. I knew he would not stay away forever. People like him never did. But I was ready. For Stephanie, I would be ready for anything. At work, I noticed Stephanie was quieter than usual. She was putting on a brave face, but I could tell the encounter with Greg had shaken her. When we bumped into each other in the hallway, I stopped her. "Hey, you okay?" I asked, keeping my voice low. She gave me a small smile, but it did not reach her eyes. "I am fine. Just tired. Do you want to grab lunch today? Get some air?" I offered. Her smile widened slightly. "I would like that." We went to a small cafe a few blocks from the office. Over sandwiches and coffee, Stephanie opened up about how she had been feeling. "I keep thinking about last night," she admitted, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. "About what he said." "Do not let his words get to you," I said. "He thrives on making people feel small. Do not give him that power." She nodded, but her expression remained troubled. "I thought I was stronger than this. I thought I was past it." "You are strong," I said firmly. "But no one gets through something like that without scars. The fact that you are still standing, still fighting, that is strength, Stephanie." Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away. "Thank you, Ethan. You always know what to say." I shrugged, trying to downplay it. "I am just telling the truth." The next few days were uneventful, quiet, almost too quiet. I could tell Stephanie was trying to focus on moving forward, but there was a shadow hanging over her, a tension that neither of us could shake. It all came to a head on Friday night. I was at home, halfway through a movie, when my phone buzzed. It was Stephanie. "Stephanie, he is here again." My heart sank. Without a second thought, I grabbed my keys and headed to her apartment. When I arrived, Greg was outside, pounding on her door. His voice was loud and slurred, and he looked even worse than he had the last time. "Greg!" I shouted, marching toward him. "Get the hell out of here!" He turned to face me, his eyes bloodshot and his expression twisted with anger. "You again," he spat. "Why do you always have to play the hero?" "Because someone has to," I said, stopping a few feet away from him. "Now leave before I call the police." "Go ahead," he sneered. "Call them. See if I care." I pulled out my phone, my thumb hovering over the emergency call button. Last chance, Greg? He glared at me, his chest heaving. For a moment I thought he might lunge at me. But then he staggered back, muttering something under his breath as he stumbled away. I waited until he disappeared down the street before knocking on Stephanie's door. She opened it cautiously, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear. "He is gone," I said, stepping inside. "Are you okay?" She nodded, but her hands were trembling. I was so scared. "You do not have to be scared anymore," I said. "I am going to make sure he stays away." Her eyes filled with tears, and she threw her arms around me. "Thank you, Ethan." I held her close, my resolve hardening. This was the last time Greg would terrorize her. I would make sure of it. The next morning, I knew it was time to take serious action. Greg was not going to stop unless someone forced him to. I spent hours researching legal options, talking to a lawyer about restraining orders, and gathering any evidence Stephanie might need. When I called her that afternoon, she sounded drained but grateful. "Do you really think it will work?" she asked after I explained the plan. "Yes," I said firmly. "He has no right to do this to you. We are going to make sure he cannot." She agreed to meet me at the lawyer's office the next day. Together, we laid out everything: Greg's history, his repeated harassment, and the incidents outside her apartment. The lawyer assured us that the evidence was more than enough to file a restraining order. "You did good," I told Stephanie as we left the office. "This is the first step." She gave me a tired smile. "I could not have done it without you." A week later, the restraining order was granted. It felt like a victory, but I knew Greg would not take it lying down. Sure enough, it was not long before he tested the boundaries. It happened one evening when Stephanie was at my place. We had started spending more time together, and that night, we were curled up on the couch, watching a movie, when her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and the color drained from her face. "What is it?" I asked, sitting up. She turned the screen toward me. It was a text from an unknown number. "You think a piece of paper can stop me?" Rage boiled in my chest. "He is not going to stop," I said, grabbing my phone. "We are calling the police." The police took the text seriously, especially given the restraining order. They tracked the number and found Greg holed up at a motel on the outskirts of town. He was arrested for violating the order, and for the first time in weeks, Stephanie and I felt like we could breathe again. That night, as we sat on the porch of my apartment, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance, Stephanie turned to me. "You have been my anchor through all of this," she said. "I do not know how I will ever repay you." "You do not have to," I said, taking her hand. "You are stronger than you realize, Stephanie. I am just glad I get to see that strength." She smiled, her eyes shining with emotion. "I think I am falling for you, Ethan." I felt my heart swell. "Good," I said softly. "Because I have already fallen for you." Under the glow of the porch light, we shared our first kiss, a moment that felt like the beginning of something new, something unbreakable. In the weeks that followed, life started to settle into a new normal. Greg remained in custody, and Stephanie began to truly thrive. At work, her confidence was palpable, and her laughter filled the office in a way that had been missing before. One evening, as we were walking home from dinner, she stopped suddenly and turned to me. "Do you think it is over?" she asked. I wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "It is over," I said. "And if it is not, we will handle it together." She leaned into me, her head resting against my shoulder. I liked the sound of that. And for the first time in what felt like forever, the world felt right.